Hello there. Let's talk about design system recipes. So, recipes are an important layer of a design system ecosystem that allows product teams to take the core design system ingredients and create these delicious and more product specific compositions out of them. This is an area that's really, really important for a lot of reasons, and that's what this is going to do is help unpack the many reasons and the art of creating design system recipes. But it's something that we see a lot of teams struggle with. How do we think about them? How do we create them? How do we manage them? And so on and so forth. So, what we're going to cover here is that recipes, they don't live in the core design system. They help teams work at their own pace. There's a few different flavors of design system recipes. They can graduate into the core design system over time. They tend to be more complex organisms in atomic design speak. Recipes should still use design tokens. And most of all, recipes are a great place for a design system team and product teams to collaborate and sort of share information and stuff like that. So let's get into it. So the first thing is that recipes don't live in the core design system. And there's a couple of reasons for that. If you don't have a recipe layer, one of two things is likely going to end up happening. The core design system is going to end up being polluted with a bunch of different product specific recipes. Or things that should be recipes, but all of a sudden now the core design system has several dozen cards because a few different teams need cards to be a certain way, right? Either that ends up happening, so you end up managing like hundreds of components in your core design system, making it unwieldy, or the design system team becomes the pattern police and they go out and they have to sort of slap each individual product team's wrists and say, no, 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 this is how the cards work. And neither of those scenarios is desirable, right? So by introducing a recipe layer into the equation, you end up sort of letting the product teams, right? This is just like, here's the place where you add the things that you need, product team. And the core design system helps support that and provides the ingredients for that layer. And they could also, the team can provide advice and guidance and things like that. We'll talk about that in a second. But the idea is that let's just acknowledge that product teams need to create, bespoke user interface components that should work with the grain of the design system. It should be using the ingredients provided by the design system, but oftentimes the products need things in a certain way or a certain configuration. So that's what the recipe layer does. And moreover, it helps these teams work at their own pace. My partner Josh wrote a really great post called Ship Faster by Building Design Systems Slower. And he talks about how the product layer is the kind of innovative, fast moving layer, right? And they're moving really, really quickly. They're trying to get things out of the door. Their priority is shipping product. And in order to do that, they need to create pieces of user interface, right? Makes a ton of sense, right? The design system layer, on the other hand, moves necessarily slower, right? Relatively slower, because it's prioritizing quality over speed. It's thinking about not just how this card is going to work in this product. They're thinking about how cards are going to work across the entire landscape at the organization. So they necessarily need to move at their own paces. And what recipes allow for is the product team to be able to move at their own pace, add things they don't see in the core design system, rather than saying, hey, design system team, we need you to drop everything and get this over to us, right? Like teams are given, with recipes, teams are given the autonomy and the authority to say, we need this and we're going to create it, which is a really, really helpful pressure release valve for the relationship between design system team and layer and product teams and layer. So that's kind of the secret sauce, is like when we see like just the weight fall from teams' shoulders that are like, being just pummeled with a lot of different requests from a lot of different product teams. The design system team is like burnout, struggling to keep up with it all. And with a recipe layer, what you're doing is you're kind of acknowledging that, yeah, like these things move at their own pace. And it's important for the design system to not speed up to the product pace, because that's going to erode the quality component of it. Nor do we want to sort of slow product teams down to work at the design system pace, right? Because that they need to get things done, right? So this recipe layer really is an important piece of the puzzle. Okay, so the next thing is that there are a few different kinds of recipes. The name recipe kind of comes from what we've been sort of talking about so far, which is we take the core design system ingredients and we arrange them and assemble them into specific compositions, right? So certain components need to be a lot more composable than other components. Things like cards, modals, drawers, headers, and footers, right? These are things that it's like they're containers, but what goes in the container might vary wildly between different products or different brands or whatever it might be. So, but that's the spirit, right? Like that. Here's the design system ingredients that are brought from the core design system. Teams at the recipe layer, they sort of assemble those parts together to create a product card for the e-commerce site, or a promo card for this marketing website, or a customer analytics card for the sort of back end, internal facing customer dashboard app or whatever. Right, so that's the idea. Take the same ingredients and make different things out of them. But then there's also this kind of other flavor of recipe, which is like actually custom components, right? So these are things that either intentionally deviate from the core design system's conventions and ingredients, where they're just like, we know that the primary button is purple, but we actually want to use this orange parallelogram button instead, and we have good reasons for it. Either that, or they're sort of building something that it doesn't yet exist in the design system, right? So it's like, let's say the e-commerce team is building like a filtering feature, and they need like a min-max range slider to sort of say like minimum price $40, maximum price $300 or whatever. And they don't see that in the design system. Well, the recipe layer is a place for them to sort of add that ingredient to the equation. And that's great. Or they just might be, these total like one-off components, right, that they need in order to make their product go. So all to say, these are the kind of like ingredients. This is the pulling the hot sauce out of your purse, or like adding like a couple little bits of razzle dazzle ingredients to an otherwise kind of down the middle, straightforward cooking recipe. Or this is where you're sort of substituting in, right, the vegan option for what the normal recipe calls for, right? So there's a real need for that, right? Products, again, they know what they need to do in order to make products better. And hopefully the design system's ingredients supports all of that, but there's a lot of reasons why sometimes the design system won't provide all of those things, or they have ideas that they want to try out and sort of kick the tires on them, which is really important. Which brings us to the next point, is that, if those experiments, right, if those like custom components for whatever reason like play out and they're like wildly successful, that's something that maybe the design system should pay attention to, right? So and that's kind of the cool thing about recipes, is that here's this almost like kind of component incubator, right? Where you have, here's this product, they have these components, they're wielding them, and they might be really successful, right? If they're sort of measuring the results of that. Let's say those orange parallelogram buttons perform really, really well. Well, maybe that's something that it's like, oh, okay, maybe we want to try to replicate that or do some other experiments with it in other products and see how it goes. And let's just say orange parallelogram buttons just totally beat the pants off of the existing conventions, well, maybe the design system should shift and pivot to the orange parallelogram buttons. That's just like one example, but I think like the idea is that you want to have this kind of feedback loop where it's like the work that's happening at that sort of innovative product level should play out, and if that work is successful and is applicable to the whole organization, then yeah, let's pull that stuff into the core design system so everyone can get that good stuff for free, right? It's important to note, though, that not every component is going to graduate into the core design system, right? So some of these things, especially the sort of product-specific compositions, probably just going to hang out and live on as recipes. But other things like that min-max range slider, that is like kind of more of a what could be in a core design system might end up there, right? So that's just like one thing to sort of note, is that both of these paths are fine. It's not like recipes are wrong and they all need to graduate or anything like that. Okay, next thing, recipes tend to be more complex components, which makes sense, right? So we call those organisms in atomic design speak. The more complex the component, the more sort of moving parts or potential arrangements of them they are, right? Versus, say, a checkbox atom that could be either checked or unchecked or indeterminate. There's like a lot fewer moving parts, to these more atomic elements. So the core design system components can really sort of capture those more sort of simple, relatively simple things, while organisms often can end up being recipes. It's just kind of an observation rather than like a hard rule. So don't feel like, you need to sort of put things of certain complexity in either place. But yeah, so that's the idea there. Another important thing to discuss is that recipes should still use design tokens coming from the design system. So design tokens are the brand primitives. You're sort of defining, here's our brand primary background, here's our alert or our error background, or error border, and our error text and things like that. And even if teams need to create their own components, it's a good idea for them to be also still be using the design system's design tokens in order to sort of stay on brand, in order to sort of stay consistent with the components coming from the design system. So these things can sort of hang side by side on a screen, but at the same time, right, one's custom built by a product team while the other things are sort of coming from the core design system. The exception to this is that, sometimes, for those use cases where the components are intentionally deviating from the design system's conventions. Again, the orange parallelogram buttons, right? You're intentionally not using what's coming from the design system there. So you just want to just be mindful of that so it doesn't start sprawling and you're recreating things and just kind of detaching things for no real good reason. Okay. Recipe layer is a great place for collaboration. This is like such a great watering hole for product teams and design system teams to come together, right? It's here where the product teams are able to kind of, just by way of doing their work, they're able to articulate how they're using the design system's ingredients, but also where they're deviating from it, where they're hacking it, where they're sort of adding on to it, where there are gaps and stuff like that. We now have this like sort of dedicated space for that kind of conversation to happen, which is really cool. So the product teams are kind of informing the design system team, like, here's how we're using this, here's where we're struggling, here's where we've had to fill in some gaps. And also, this is a place where the design system team can kind of come in and support and guide the creation of these recipes and stuff. So even if the design system team isn't doing this production work, they're able to sort of give guidance and stuff to the teams to make sure that they are still working with the grain of the organizational standard that is the design system, right? So it's this great kind of like two-way street where the product team's informing and helping the design system team understand what they're working on, and the design system team is able to sort of reach out and sort of, you know, provide advice and feedback and guidance there. And yeah, just like really promotes a really healthy relationship between these two different layers that can be a really tricky relationship to get right. So recipes is like a great way to foster collaboration and communication between these different groups. Okay, and then the last thing that's worth sort of mentioning here is that uh, creating a recipe layer is pretty easy, actually. It's, you know, if you have a core design system and then you have products, right? It might make sense to just introduce these kind of more product specific layers in addition to your core design system. So what that looks like in Figma land or whatever, you have your core design system, right? You create as many different recipe libraries, product specific recipe libraries as you need. So if you have like an e-commerce website, there's an e-commerce recipes library, right? That subscribes to the core design system, uses those, you know, the e-commerce team can arrange and assemble all of their e-commerce specific components and add custom stuff there. And then individual teams on the e-commerce site would then sort of subscribe to the core design system library in addition to any recipe library that's needed. So that's how that works in design land. And then the same thing in code as well, right? So you have the core design system living in code. You have the recipe layer that you're able to introduce that are sort of e-commerce specific code UI components. And then the actual sort of code base will subscribe to both the core design system library package and the recipe package kind of coming from that layer as well. So for teams that might be in a position where you have a bunch of existing recipes that are hanging out in your core design system layer, what you want to do is kind of do some surgery. And that is can be difficult to do, but also doesn't have to be. You can basically sort of deprecate these recipes at the sort of core design system layer, move them to the appropriate new recipe layer, and basically say, here's the migration path. It still exists. It's just kind of we're moving its location to a different thing. So not incredibly difficult to set up or manage this recipe layer. And as time goes on, we feel really strongly, I guess, like this is a pattern, this is a layer, this is a piece of the architecture that we found to be really, really successful for helping manage design systems at scale, where there's loads of different products, there's loads of different brands, there's loads of different product families, all of these things with kind of competing or different needs. And recipes has proven to be a really important concept that that we've seen really successful. So I hope that this has been helpful to unpack what design system recipes are, how to wield them, how to think about them, how to create them. And yeah, if you ever have any questions about them, just feel free to get in touch. Thank you.